In 1980, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining spread fear and terror in theaters. The UK-US production with an R rating had a budget of $19 million and pulled more than twice in the US back. It was a success but got mixed reviews, like almost all Kubrick movies, and even 2 Razzie nominations. Today it is constantly quoted or referred to. Relatively subtle, like here in Twister from 1996, or absolutely inappropriate, flat and bumbling as in the unwatchable 80s CGI reference parade Ready Player One from 2018, as a replacement for the legally unimplementable original Blade Runner sequence from the book, which would have at least made sense in the unbearable infantile children's story, somehow. The Shining is one of the most important horror movies of all time and exists in a 2-hour European version and a 24 minutes longer US version. For Europe, Kubrick took out a few scenes. The whole subject about Jack's alcoholism or his physical clashes with Danny were dropped. Also, the possession of Danny by his imaginary friend is missing. He said the Europeans don't need the additional material to orient themselves in the story. Both versions are real director's cuts. The movie is based on the 3rd novel by Stephen King, The Shining from 1977. It is about Jack Torrance, a dry alcoholic who lost his job as an English teacher after assaulting a student, and even broke the arm of his psychic son when he was drunk, and his wife Wendy threatens to leave him. He sees the new winter caretaker job in a remote mountain hotel as a chance to fix his marriage. The snowfall leaves the family generally cut off from the outside world in the isolated hotel. One of his most important duties is to manually regulate the pressure of the basement boiler every few hours. When the family arrives there, they meet the chef Dick Halloran, who also possesses similar abilities as Danny, and informs him that he can be reached at any time with a telepathic call for help. Danny starts to see ghosts and other strange apparitions, and the hotel seems to take more and more possession of his father. In an escalation of violence, Wendy and the rushing to the rescue Halloran get knocked down by Jack with a cricket bat. In the end, the 3 can escape while the Overlook Hotel explodes, because Jack has forgotten to take care of the boiler pressure.
Jack Torrance.
Oh, well, come on in, Jack. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Ullman.
The former teacher and dry alcoholic Jack Torrance takes a position as a caretaker at the Overlook Hotel, a huge building complex in the Colorado mountains, which closes every year during wintertime. He also wants to write a novel and fix the relationship with his wife Wendy and their 5-year-old son Danny, which suffered from his alcoholism and anger issues. The chef Dick Halloran explains to Danny that he and his grandmother shared telepathic abilities, which he calls Shining. Danny tells him about Tony, his imaginary friend, who often tells and shows him eerie things.
Is Tony the one that tells you things?
Yes.
Kubrick had a very good cast like Jack Nicholson or Shelley Duvall, and also Danny Lloyd did a fantastic job for a child actor. With Shining began the breakthrough of the Steadicam, which was used in the movie by the inventor Garrett Brown himself. The creepy soundtrack is by Wendy Carlos and Rachel Elkind, but also containing classical pieces from other composers, seemingly out of print since there were apparently some rights issues back then.
Run. Let run. Let run. Let run.
The Torrances are going to take care of the Overlook for us this winter.
Let run. Let run.
I'm outlining a new writing project. 5 months of peace is just what I want.
Novel and movie are both very good, and kind of similar in their plot, but differ extremely in atmosphere and message, and I clearly prefer Kubrick's version.
What about room 237?
It's typical of you to create a problem like this when I am really into my work.
Let run.
The novel is basically a ghost story in which the hotel itself is the main antagonist, whose heart, aka boiler can, with care allows life but also death if neglected. It has supernatural elements and spirits from the get-go that actively intervene in the story. Kubrick renounced the boiler plot and replaced it in his version with a labyrinth. Avoids
A little slow tonight, isn't it?
when possible direct or active interventions of the ghosts and tries to depict the supernatural elements mainly with possible hallucinations and madness. In the excellent Halloween episode Treehouse of Horror 5 from the 6th season The Simpsons from 1994, Homer works with his family in a remote estate by Mr. Burns, who cuts off the TV and gets rid of all the beer supplies before he leaves, which quite rightly drives Homer insane. In 1997, the TV movie Shining showed its boring face. Dissatisfied with Kubrick's version, Stephen King writes the screenplay himself for a more faithful adaptation. And indeed, this version contains much more scenes from the novel, the uncanny scene with the tree animals and the explosive final. As it is often the case with King, everything sounds quite plausible on paper, but translated into film, maximum overconfidence sends greetings, it gets messy. A scene in McGarry's The Sliming. I know replacing one of the best directors of all time, such as Kubrick, never ends with a satisfying substitute. But the choice of McGarry, one of the worst directors of our time, who can't be taken serious anymore already after his Sleepwalkers disaster debut, is for me not comprehensible in the slightest. Even if you don't mind the too long 4-hour running time and the god-awful cheap-looking CGI crap, the total miscast of the now super annoying Danny character gives this shitty version the death penalty that even a capable director could not have prevented.
No, that's actually not true. If you call the Mount Hood Resort and you ask for room 217, you will find there is no such room. The reason that he changed it from 217 to 237 was because the room 237 in the film represents the moon landing stage where he worked. My interpretation of The Shining is that there's many levels to this film. This is like three-dimensional chess, and he's trying to tell us several stories that appear to be separate, but actually are not.
In 2012, the documentary Room 237 is dedicated to various theories about Shining, taught by fans and people I don't know. The 9 segments are focusing on different elements within Kubrick's version, told entirely through voiceovers, visualized with scenes from The Shining and other movies. It got some positive reviews, but not from Stephen King and for sure not from me. In 2013, Stephen King's Dr. Sleep continues the story of Danny Torrance from The Shining. As an adult, Danny, now Simple Dan, takes up his father's legacy of anger and alcoholism, but overcomes his addiction thanks to the AA sect, aka Alcoholics Anonymous, and uses his Shining to provide comfort to dying patients in the hospice, which brings him the nickname Dr. Sleep. At the same time, a group of vampire-like creatures enter this scene, who keep themselves artificially immortal with Shining energy, here unimaginative called steam. Which level tells you about the abilities? I guess calling it directly midichlorians like in episode 1, the Jar Jar Awakens, would have been too obvious. This explains of course why Obi-Wan Kenobi himself is sneaking around as Dan. These energy vampires mainly feed on Shining children, apparently caught a deadly disease and for some reason are now after a very special child, who has of course some super duper powers, which they want to use as a cure. And that works because who cares? Dan of course has been for years unconsciously in contact with this chosen child, a little boy called Anakin Skywalker, of course a girl named Abra, and is with her help, Abracadabra, able to defeat the bad guys at the end. Needless to mention when he wrote The Shining. And by the way, all his interesting books. King had back then himself addiction problems, and now, many years later, he is sober and a brand new person, crapping out this completely uninteresting, silly and boring as hell Dr. Cheap AA edition, only to spread his holy message. Just like the usual smart asses who got rescued, enlightened, converted, or otherwise brainwashed. In 2019, Mike Flanagan's unavoidable movie version with a similar plot as the novel bombed on the big screen and made not even 73 million with costs over 50 million worldwide. Dan faces together with Super Abra the steam vampires, his addiction past and his experiences in the Overlook Hotel. The movie isn't exciting or scary for a second, as it becomes early on clear that our two heroes are something very special and quite invincible, especially the completely overpowered little girl, who acts like a smart-ass adult, almost always keeps the upper hand and knows and does everything the script needs right now. The movie is a strange mixture of King's novel, which of course continues his book, and Kubrick's adaptation, with the labyrinth for the final and the intact hotel that didn't get being blown up, which is now literally the stage of the last 30 minutes. In the book, it's the steam vampire campsite, conveniently located exactly where the Overlook Hotel used to be. That's why Shining 2, now with more shine, partially reconstructs the look, in the final the film music, or even whole scenes, like the X scene, the bleeding elevator doors, etc. from Kubrick's version, reenacts them or simply uses the original shots, and not from King's favorite McGarry's Snorefest. So that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There are also fewer characters and storylines as in the book, partially shortened or with different outcome, especially in the second half. The completely silly final with Team Dan / Super Abra versus Team Boss Level Steam Vampire / Nobody, since her whole oh so dangerous gang is fast and quick defeated without any problems whatsoever, comes off like a poor man's Harry Potter, in which it doesn't become at any moment clear why somebody has the upper hand. And superpowers, strengths and weaknesses seem to be pulled out of a hat as they went along.